So this video is going to look at valence electrons. So the first thing we need to do is we need to define what a valence electron is. Well, we know that the electrons live on the outside of an atom. So in the nucleus, we have our protons and our neutrons, and our electrons are on the outside. And according to Bohr's model of the atom, those electrons live in energy levels. So the first one is the closest to the nucleus, the second one is on the outside of the first, and so on. It's like layers of an onion. So the valence electrons are specifically the electrons in the outermost energy level. So our definition is the electrons in the outer energy level. So they're the farthest ones away from the nucleus. So the inside electrons are not valence electrons. The valence electrons are the ones that are on the outside of the atom. An atom can have a maximum number of valence electrons, and that maximum number is 8. And we're going to come to learn that 8 is kind of a magic number when it comes to electrons, especially when it comes to bonding. So an atom can have 8 valence electrons. It can have up to 8. It can have anywhere from 0 to 8. There's a really easy way to figure out how many valence electrons an atom is going to have, and that's to use our periodic table. Okay, so I have my periodic table here. Our transition metals are in the middle, and we have our metals over here, and then our non-metals and our metalloids on this side. And the really easy way to determine how many valence electrons an atom is going to have is just to start on the far left and count across, and we're going to skip the transition metals. So our first column has 1, our second column has 2, we're going to skip the transition metals, go over here, this column will have 3, then 4, 5, 6, 7, and then our last column has 8. So how many valence electrons an atom has for a specific type of element depends where on the periodic table that element is. So any element in the first column is going to have 1 valence electron. Any element in the second column is going to have 2 valence electrons. We'll come back to the transition metals in a minute. Any electrons in, this is actually column 13 on your periodic table, it has 3. 14 has 4. Any element in column 15 has 5 valence electrons. Any element in column 16 has 6. Any element in 17 has 7, and then our last column has the maximum number of valence electrons. It has 8. So let's practice with just a couple down here at the bottom. So let's start with lithium. When we look on our periodic table, lithium is in our first column. So we would say that lithium has 1 valence electron. And then in the next example, we have nitrogen. And nitrogen is in our 5th column on our periodic table. So you're just looking at your periodic tables to figure this out, and nitrogen's on the 5th one, which means nitrogen has 5 valence electrons. The next one is sulfur. Sulfur is the second row down, but it's in column 16, so it's going to have 6 valence electrons. Chlorine is also in the second row down, but it is in column 17, so it's going to have 7 valence electrons. Now, let's talk about our transition metals. We skipped the transition metals when we were numbering our columns, and that's because all transition metals have 2 valence electrons. So since we skipped transition metals and then started with 3 over here, all of our transition metals, with some exceptions, we're not going to worry about the exceptions. We're going to assume that all of our transition metals have 2 valence electrons. So our last example is copper, and copper is in the middle of our transition metals. It's over here. And so since it's part of the transition metals, it doesn't matter what column it's in, it has 2 valence electrons. So that's how you can use your periodic table to figure out how many valence electrons an atom of a specific type of element will have.